Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Hello and welcome to another episode in our debut Spotlight series, where we shine the light on the freshest authors and their work. For today's episode, I am joined by Alan Murrin, author of The Coast Road, which has been endorsed by the likes of actor Gillian Anderson and was described by author Sarah Winman as a stonkingly good novel. Alan Murrin writes with the calm, poetic fluency of the best of Irish writers. Alan is an Irish fiction writer based in Berlin. In 2021, he was the winner of the Bournemouth Writing Prize for his short story The Wake, which went on to be shortlisted for Short Story of the Year at the Irish Book Awards. His writing has featured in the Irish Times, the Times Literary Supplement, and the White Review, amongst others. In 2023, Alan was awarded an Irish Arts Council Next Generation Award, and as a novel in progress, The Coast Road was shortlisted for the Peters Fraser Dunlop Queer Fiction Prize and longlisted for the Caledonia New Novel Award. The Coast Road will be published by Bloomsbury tomorrow in the UK and by HarperCollins next month in the US. To chat all about it, I have Alan here with me. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, Hannah. It's lovely to be speaking with you.
It's lovely to be speaking to you too. We're acting like we haven't spoken before we've started recording.
No.
You are already a joy to chat to, so I'm very excited for this. But before I dive into your book, I must ask, what are you currently reading?
I'm reading about 10 books at the same time.
What?
I know, and that's not my normal reading pace. I usually have a few things on the go, often because I find that I read a lot for what I'm writing, or I'm reading fiction as a way of researching the next thing that I'm working on. But I'm also sort of doing panels with other authors at the moment to promote the book, so that I'm reading their books, which is a great joy. However, I would say that something that I would like to bring to the attention of your listeners is a book by a writer called Candia McWilliam, and it's called A Case of Knives. It was published, I think, around the late 80s or early 90s. She's a Scottish author. I became fascinated by her because I read her memoir, which was called Things to Look For in Winter. And I read an article about this memoir, and it showed this like stunningly, strikingly beautiful woman who had this kind of like seemingly blessed existence. And actually, she was an alcoholic. She struggled a great deal, and then she became functionally blind. I can't pronounce the name of the disease, but her eyelids stopped functioning, and her life obviously was thrown into complete turmoil. And I read this memoir, and I was like, oh my God, if this woman can write like this about herself, what is her fiction like? And so I bought this novel, and it is the strangest, most gorgeous book about a surgeon called Lucas Silk, who becomes obsessed with a young man called Hal, but Hal decides that he wants to get married, and Lucas, being the controlling figure that he is, decides that he will choose his wife for him. And it is the creepiest book. It is written, the word that keeps coming to mind, and you'll have to forgive my pretentiousness, is baroque. It is detailed and ornate. There are words in here I still don't know the meaning of. It's written in quite short chapters, and it's like having a really like piece of really rich dark chocolate every time you read a little bit of it. And there is, I can't find the line now, but when he talks about the way he became in love, how he fell in love with this younger man, Hal, he says something along the lines of, when I say that my life opened like a grand piano, I mean it. And you're just within the context of the book, you're like, oh, stop. I wish someone would say that about me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's A Case of Knives.
That sounds incredible, and I think you described it as being dark but gorgeous at the same time, and that's the kind of book that I need in my life straight away.
If I'm remembering correctly, because I'm reading it for the second time, the title comes at some point in the book. This isn't a spoiler. She says something like, language is a case of knives. Like words themselves are sharp instruments that cause danger. And I just thought, oh. Yeah.
That's so good. I aspire to be able to write as well as that. Now, on to your book, The Coast Road. Could you tell our listeners what your book is about?
Yeah, my book is set in County Donegal in the northwest of Ireland in 1994, 1995. It is a time when Ireland was still very much kind of in the stranglehold of the Catholic Church, when people's lives were dictated by those rules and judgments. I think the location is relevant at that particular time. It is an economically prosperous town in a country that hadn't found its feet. The Celtic Tiger hadn't come along yet. That was sort of late 90s. And it's about three marriages. Izzy is married to a local politician, and I think the question surrounding her marriage is, will she stay and can she make it work? Is it good enough? There's Colette Crowley, a poet who's married to a very wealthy local businessman, and she has left him to have to have a relationship with a married man in Dublin. And I don't want to be judgmental about Colette.
We love Colette.
Yeah. She had a married man in Dublin, and she comes back to try and reclaim her old life. And the question is, will she get it back? And there's also a woman called Dolores Mullen, who is married to Donal, and she's in an abusive relationship. And the question for the reader is whether she will be able to escape.
Incredible. That was a much better job than I would have been able to do, but I did absolutely love this book, and I was so sad when I finished it because there's such a rich group of characters in the book, and I loved getting to delve into the minds of all of them. And I was really interested actually because, yes, your book primarily focuses on the lives of Colette and Izzy, but you do explore the perspectives of all the people sort of around them, like their families. What drew you to taking on the challenge of sort of exploring a whole community rather than just say zoning in on one household?
Idiocy. Basically, if someone else had told me, writing is so difficult that I always think, make life as easy for yourself as you possibly can. The chances of anything that you start being successful, and I don't even mean in commercial terms, I just mean in literary terms, in finishing the project or making it work. When friends who are like starting a project come to me and go, it's a multi-perspective narrative of 4 different frameworks, and it moves backwards and forwards in time, and I say, stop doing that. Don't do it. However, when I sat down to write this book and I started to think about how I would structure it, and it just was kind of calling to me that this was the way that it had to be written. So I guess the challenge that I then gave myself was, if someone holds the perspective, it has to mean something. So every time somebody takes the perspective, it has to move the plot forward in some way. And they couldn't hold it just once. It had to be meaningful within the context of the book, apart from Anne. And that's because her narrative is kind of like the fulcrum of the book. It's right bang in the center. She only has the perspective once, but what she sees and how she behaves changes the whole story. And so it's the point that it turns on.
Poor Anne. I wanted to ask actually, because I'm quite amused that you said that you didn't find it easy because the book flowed so beautifully, and I absolutely loved it. But I have to ask, did you have a favorite character?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm in love with Izzy. She's the reason that I wrote the book. I love a book with a quote unquote difficult female character that you're rooting for. And the whole point was to have this woman who at points you're going, oh my God, this woman is a nightmare, but I'm rooting for her at all times to succeed. So, for me, she's the star of the show. But for Izzy to work, she needed a foil. And of course, Colette is her greatest desires and her greatest fears writ large. She is everything she's scared of becoming, but everything she longs to be. And in that funny, it's so funny that, and as a consequence, Colette has eclipsed Izzy. When people read this book, they're like, all of the marketing material, everything that goes out is sort of about Colette, and
Yeah.
also she's the character that people seem to be connecting the most. And it's kind of ironic, really, isn't it? Because like in Izzy's life, she would like to be
Yeah.
the sophisticated, glamorous one, and actually in this book as well, in this book's experience of the wider world, Colette has taken over.
Yeah.
The show. However, I would also say that the longer I spent working on the book, there was something about the ending that wasn't working. And I worked with my agent a little bit before we sent it out. And really, what needed to happen, I discovered, was that Dolores needed to come into her own, and she needed to have agency, and she needed to be a bigger player in the narrative. And so that meant that I had to spend a lot more time and work getting to know her.
Yeah.
And that was a great pleasure. She has a rich, I mean, I say it like I didn't create her. I discovered that she had a much richer and more interesting inner life than I was giving her credit for, and
Right.
that was a pleasure to unpack.
Yeah, I really liked her character's arc throughout the book. I thought it was really beautiful the way that you explored her. But when you're writing so many different characters and kind of zoning in on their lives so closely, how do you kind of go about that? Do you have to like write a lot about that character beforehand, or does it just kind of come out whilst you're writing? Like, what is that process like?
Well, I mean, you just make it up.
It's that simple, Hannah.
No, I will say for one thing, there's a chapter, I can't remember, it's relatively central in the book, maybe 100 pages in, chapter 10 or 11. It's where Colette is on her own in her cottage, and she's thinking about the mistakes she's made and maybe some of the mistakes she's about to make. And it was the hardest chapter to write. I would also say that now that I'm reflecting on it, it might also be because writing where a character is by themselves there's an inherent lack of dynamism to something like that, because really what creates tension and makes the book come alive is a person's interactions with other people in the world. So often if somebody else's writing was flat and they came to me and said, how do I fix this? I was like, you have to have them doing something, you have to have communicating with another person. But this was my opportunity for myself and for the reader to get to know a little bit of Colette's backstory. It started off being 27 pages long. It went down to 7 pages. And I think finally it was 10 pages. And what was cut out, I kind of work on the basis of what's the minimum the reader needs to know to feel comfortable in this world. And essentially, a lot of the backstory about Colette was going, oh, she was a fool for a man. And I felt that was so surplus to requirements, because who hasn't been a fool for a man? Readers don't need to have that explained to them.
Yeah.
We get it, Yeah, you met the wrong fella and it didn't work out. I had spent a great deal of time detailing that dynamic to realize it's not important. So it's important perhaps for me to know, even if I didn't include it. And yeah, I do think a lot about the characters' lives outside, beyond the page and beyond the story that I'm telling. And a lot of that doesn't go in.
You've had, like I said in the intro, you've had some incredible endorsements for the book. Like I said, Gillian Anderson, no biggie. Do you think she gave you an endorsement because she wants a chance at being in any future adaptation of this book?
I couldn't possibly say.
Fine, we'll move on. So, the Coast Road is set in 1994, and throughout the book, we get a real sense of the sort of political happenings with the divorce referendum and how heavily the church plays a role in this community's life. What interested you in writing about this period, and what did you kind of want to represent about it?
I mean, first of all, I didn't plan to structure the book around the divorce referendum. It was the case was that I was writing short stories about this community, and they've spanned from 1990 to like 2018. One of them, a short story called What Poets Do, which featured Izzy and Colette. It had a particular resonance. Something seemed to be working about it. And then I kind of thought to myself, okay, so what if I were to take this and expand it and raise the stakes? That was set, I think, as I said, around 1994, 1995. That a particular period of time, I was an adolescent. The world, everything in the world was new to me. It's like redolent with nostalgia, kind of like very alive in my mind. And then I thought, oh, and actually, the divorce referendum was about to happen a year later. So that adds another layer of tension to the story because people sort of had to make their marriages work, or at least the only option was legal separation, which meant that you could never remarry.
Right.
However, I guess it's also important for readers to know that this isn't some like po-faced exploration of the divorce referendum. The only people who know about it in the book they're very few. James knows because he's a politician. He's mentioned it to Izzy. And by and large, the people are operating in a system where divorce isn't an option, and they're not even thinking about that. However, yeah, a lot of interesting things came out of it though. I needed to do a bit of research on what legal separation even meant in no sense. And I have a friend who's a barrister, and she was an expert in family law, and she was super, super helpful at answering my questions and going to the law library and photographing stuff. One of the most fun little anecdotes that came out of it was that one of the government's big fears in legalizing divorce was that men would be divorcing their annoying wives in droves, and the opposite happened. All of the applications were from women. So, not all of them, obviously, but the majority of them. And yeah, I mean, since then, it became as the book went along, I realized how important it was. And I was also interested in exploring the idea of what it would mean if it became legal for a woman like Izzy, or any woman. But for someone like Izzy living in a rural community, super small town, middle-class woman who is maybe not very well educated, hasn't worked outside the home before, what would divorce mean for a woman like that? She kind of ruminates on it a bit and says, it's meaningful for Colette. She has a rich husband. She's educated. She has worked. She could go and get a job. She has family in Dublin. She could go back there. But I was thinking, for a woman like Izzy, where is she going to? What does her life what is her life going to look like? And I think I won't tell you the decision that she makes because it's kind of crucial to the story. But
of course, yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in that idea of like what fundamental difference would it make?
What really interested me actually, which is sort of linked to the stuff surrounding the politics and the divorce referendum, but also like the church's presence in their lives. What I found fascinating about the characters was their obsession with external perspective. I think that's how you'd kind of describe it, in that they feel like they have to maintain the look of like a good home, a good family, a good marriage. It's all so like crucial to them. Where do you think this anxiety about keeping up appearances sort of stems from for this community?
I think if you look at the figure of James, it's integral to him because as a politician, he has to be seen to be upholding certain. And I mean, he has an obsession with appearances. Because he believes that his standing in the community is based on that. And that was very important for his character, because otherwise you'd kind of be thinking, well, God, this guy needs to chill out. Why is he so obsessed with this? But you're right, everyone is obsessed with being seen to do the right thing. A lot of it is to do with the church passing judgment on people's behavior from a pulpit every Sunday and telling people how to behave. I think there's also I say at one point that it's not even about doing the right thing. It's about being seen to do the right thing. Someone like Donald Mullen, he goes to mass. He puts his daughter on his knee when he sits at mass. And I think at some point I say something along the lines of, as long as you're seen to be doing the right thing, there's no end to what you can actually get away with. No, and I'm really, really interested in exploring that, because in a lot of, I mean, femicide, crime against women, it's a huge problem in every country. It's a big problem in Ireland. It continues to be. And in so many of the cases that happened in the last 15, 20 years where women have been murdered, there has been such a great deal of victim blaming that has happened. I mean, it happens everywhere, but reporting by newspapers has so often been, the subtext, not even subtext, sometimes it's very plainly written, is, oh, well, that woman, what was that woman doing by herself? Why wasn't she with her husband? Why wasn't she with her children? Why wasn't, and I suppose the subtext meaning that if you behave outside the law, outside of the boundaries, you will be punished for it. And that bad things happen to you when you don't follow the rules. And I think that's a fundamental reason as well why people are so obsessed to be doing the right thing. Otherwise, it leads to danger.
Yeah, and it's so funny because it's not funny, but it's ironic that the women, not only in this story, but you see this all the time, but the women in the story, they're holding up their homes, they're holding up their families. They're the kind of ones looking after everything, and yet I don't know, like it is about that presence, but this presence is important for this show that's been put on is basically for the benefit of the men, if that makes sense. And like as he says, I think later in the book that it's all right for James like swanning off to, is it Dublin that he goes to for his political stuff? He just swans off there and she's kind of left to deal with the children. But I find it so interesting, the way that the church, the way its presence is in their lives, and it feels almost suffocating at times. And I have no experience of that because I'm not from a religious background. It's not kind of this way. It wasn't this way where I grew up or in the community that I grew up in. But are you from Donegal?
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you feel that presence when you were younger of the church?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Life were circumscribed by those rules. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is a accurate reflection of the environment that I grew up in. That's a lived experience. Yeah.
Was it a nice place to grow up?
I mean, it's a beautiful place full of warm, interesting people, for sure.
You definitely get a sense of that. I think you do a really great job of sort of describing the beauty and the sort of the various characters that you might find in a small community like that, whilst also exploring the sort of darker side of it. And I think you kind of need that, and that's what makes it such a rich book, is that you explore both the light and the dark. Now, I am on a personal mission since watching an interview, and you're probably going to roll your eyes at this, but I watched an interview between Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal talking about Irish phrases and their favourite Irish phrases, and your book is littered with Irish phrases that I absolutely loved. So I need to ask you about a few of them, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What does too sweet to be wholesome mean?
Oh, that's a good one. That means that you shouldn't trust anyone who's too saccharine and sweet. So it's like sugar is bad for you because it's too sweet. So don't trust anyone who's too ingratiating.
I love that one. That was the one that stood out to me. There's another one that I think was my favourite, which I don't actually know if I'm assuming this is an Irish phrase. He has a bad eye in his head.
Oh, I love that you pointed that one out. Isn't it also quite sexy though?
So good. But what does it mean?
Oh, it just means, I think that it means he looks like trouble. And I know when people use the phrase about someone, and if you know the guy they're talking about, you know exactly what they mean. Like you wouldn't trust them. They look like trouble, but also like probably, and not even necessarily a bit sexy, but could be a bit sexy.
Mm-hmm. I think and I hope you'll let me say this because I don't think it's much of a spoiler, but there is a moment when Izzy and James are sat in the living room and they're having a conversation with, can I say they were talking to police if I don't mention what it was about?
That's in the prologue. So
we're fine. We're fine. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So they are having a conversation with the police, and the back and forth between them both. It was so Irish, the conversation and the flow of it. And I was just completely obsessed. I just don't think there's the way that conversations flow and the phrases that jump out, it was just so amazing. I think that was like my favorite part of the book was all these different phrases that came out to me that I'd kind of, yeah, I'd not really experienced them all. I mean, I work with a woman from Northern Ireland, and she wrote a list to me the other day, and I'll actually show you. She wrote a list to me of Irish phrases, and I'm just so obsessed with them. I don't think there's anything quite like them. I learned the other day that pure scundered means really embarrassed, which I am newly obsessed with. But what is your favourite Irish phrase?
I can tell you that, no problem. It is a dose.
A
So,
dose.
so if you say, for example, if you were feeling sick, you might say, "Oh, I have a dose of the flu. I have a dose of the flu." However, if someone is really tedious and boring and the kind of person you'd like jump in a doorway to avoid if you saw them, you'd say, "Oh, he's a dose, that fella."
Stop.
And it's like literally the most insulting thing that an Irish person could say to you because it means you're no crack. It's like you're just, and that is like, that's the biggest crime is being dull and not
Yeah.
contributing. I mean, so if so, oh, he's a dose. And actually, Sister Michael says it in Derry Girls when the priest with the good hair is talking about, he's doing the hands across the barricades
Yeah, yeah,
episode
yeah.
to the Catholics, and she just turns to the camera and goes, dose. And just, yeah.
Oh, I never even knew what that meant. That's amazing. Yeah, I think I would quite like to be referred to as good crack. That's like the dream. I think one of my favorites is you know yourself. It doesn't sound good in my accent.
Yeah, yeah, it has to be said with a certain
It
intonation.
does.
You
My
know,
northern accent just shits all over that. Sorry.
you know yourself.
You know yourself. It's so good. I should probably move on from showing my love for Irish phrases, but I just think
I
this the
enjoyed that interlude very much.
yeah, I know, I loved it. Oh, I have got a question written down about that. What is the good sitting room?
Oh yeah. So often in Irish houses, maybe even I think in just kind of like middle class homes, not even necessarily. You might have a lovely new build bungalow where you could have a good sitting room, and you would have a living room, which might be where you would go and watch telly. Maybe it would even be connected to the kitchen, and kind of like a room where there's an old sofa and the TV's on in the corner, and then you would have a room that you would only go into on special occasions.
And that's the good sitting room.
And like the priest came over and that would have all the Waterford crystal in it and like the good china and things on display, and there's probably like sleeves over the arm rests so that the sofa doesn't get damaged in any way. That's the good sitting room, yeah.
Though there is the moment I was speaking about before where Izzy and James are in the living room and the police are there and she
What's
knocks
in the good
off.
sitting room when the police comes? You can't have the police. You bring the police into the good sitting room.
They're not in the good sitting room.
They are, yeah.
Oh, they are, yeah. And she knocks off the ornament and it smashes everywhere. And she she clears it up with a dustpan and brush and then shows it to them. And she's like, "Have you ever seen what £200 looks like?"
She's good crack.
Love her. Love her. I wanted to ask, I feel like I'm going a bit serious and I'm not trying to be, but I kind of briefly spoke about it before about how the women hold up the home. And I found it really interesting the way that you explored motherhood in this book and the way that it sort of presents in different ways for each of these characters. What interested you in writing about motherhood and specifically the different roles that it plays in these women's lives?
I think one of the things that I was interested in exploring was how, when there is conflict in marriages, how often the children can be ignored or neglected within in that dynamic because arguments between spouses, I mean, everyone has parents, they can become so consumed by that dynamic that often there is to the detriment of the kids. And I was also interested in showing women that like these women aren't wallflowers. They are growing up. They're in a Catholic world, but they're not playing by the rules, and they're also not shy to speak up for themselves. I mean, Izzy and Colette are not bedraggled women who have no power. They're fighting against the situation they're in. And I mean, neither of them are going to win Mother of the Year. Dolores is perhaps the only one who really puts the needs of her children above her own wants and needs and desires. And of course, we're only really like judging Izzy and Colette in this. We don't even think about how James and Sean behave because you don't question for parents of that time, you didn't really question how, as long as the man was going out to work and earning money and doing what he was supposed to do, you didn't kind of think about things like, is he spending enough time with his kids? Is he being conscientious enough about them? Yeah, so I was interested in showing mothers who are determined to live their own lives by their own rules and not as only honest, good, virtuous, true, and like maternal all the way through, you know?
Yeah.
That's hopefully more complex than that.
You definitely get a sense of that with Colette. I think she was such a fantastic character, and she has this sort of like bohemian quality to her, but she sort of, in what we were speaking about earlier, she kind of goes against this trying to maintain this good look to the like a good external perspective. She's kind of not about maintaining that. She kind of follows her heart and what she wants to do. And yes, she sort of regrets certain things that she's done, but she's her own woman.
And she clearly adores her children, but is not willing to sacrifice the entirety of herself to motherhood.
Exactly. Yeah. But she's so great. And I did want to ask what inspired her.
The character.
Yeah.
Question. She really did arise as in opposition to Izzy, as almost kind of like a projection of Izzy's fears and desires, as I said. And then she took on her own life and became I don't know, the heroine in a way. Yeah, honestly, she just, I grew up around creative women. It wasn't in a small town in Ireland. It's not unusual for there to be, 10 poets.
Yeah.
And I was also interested in creating someone who was sophisticated and educated in a way perhaps that Izzy is not, and worldly in a way that she is not. And in a way, she's written by the other people in the town. There are so many different perspectives. Everyone has an opinion on her. And I was interested in that to the extent to which her identity is created by other people's opinions, value judgments. I think I write at some point that Izzy describes her like that her heart lifts every time she sees her, and that just speaking to her is like sliding into a current of warmth and charm and good humor. She is, and I feel like I did want to create that kind of warm presence in the book. If you met Colette coming down the street and you saw her, you'd be like, oh, it's Colette, But at the same time, for these women at this time, they can't subdue their judgments enough. It's see her, their heart lifts, and then they remember to be judgmental. It's like, oh, hang on a second, but I'm not allowed to really like her because she's done a bad thing. And I think to some extent, Colette had to be this warm presence at the heart of the book, or otherwise she would have been too easy to dismiss.
Yeah, I did want to say, and I hope that you will take this as the compliment that it's meant as, but I worry whenever I go into a book written by a man, when there's female characters at the center of it, of how women are going to be written, because I've had bad reading experiences where I'm like, I don't know a woman like that when it's been written by a man. But you write these women in just the most gorgeous way, and they just felt so real and authentic to me. And yeah, I just absolutely loved it. So for our listeners, you have to go and pick up a copy of The Coast Road, because I just absolutely loved these characters. And like I said before, like, I'm so sad that I finished this book. It is just so gorgeous.
Thank you so much. That's really
No,
kind.
thank you. I would like to ask a question that is one of our favorite questions to ask on the podcast. What are your literary influences?
Okay, particularly for this book, I would say I watched a lot of Sopranos. I watched it, I think I watched it for the third time in a row when I was in lockdown. Also love the work of William Trevor. But I think like direct influences for this book were Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout.
Oh my gosh, we've had so many people recommending this book recently, and I've not read it yet.
It's when I talk about a central female character who's difficult, you really want to see succeed. She is the embodiment of that. I'm very interested in characters, especially female characters, who have a difficulty in accessing their inner life. They've got, they maybe have a creative impulse that they don't know how to get out. Another book that was a big influence was Nora Webster by Colm Tóibín. It's about a widow, a recently widowed woman in Ireland, I think maybe 60s. And she's trying to negotiate and navigate life after the death of her husband, doesn't know how to behave, doesn't know how to deal with her grief, probably the people around her seem to feel like she is being difficult all of the time. And she has to discover how to make a life for herself in the absence of her husband. And then The Green Road by Anne Enright was another book that I read about a complex, complicated Irish family with a matriarch who I loved called Rosaline. And I remember reading that book and seeing a lot of my own experience reflected in it. And I think there's a moment in the book in The Green Road where someone refers to Rosaline as she. I know I've heard Anne Enright refer to Rosaline as a case. She's a case.
So good.
It's like, she's a big character.
Yeah.
Big trouble.
She's a case.
Yeah.
I'm using that. There's so many great books that you've recommended there, and I am definitely adding some of those to my TBR pile because shamefully I've not read most of the ones that you've recommended, so I'm excited. I read The Wren the Wren by Anne Enright last year, and I just think she's just incredible, isn't she? An absolute powerhouse of a writer, so I'm excited to go back and read that. Now, to finish off our episode, I like to finish on a recommendation, and I know you've given me lots of books today, but if there's anything that you want to recommend, whether it's books, TV, film, podcasts, anything you've enjoyed recently, I'm sure my listeners would love to hear it.
Books, TV, film,
Podcasts, anything. It can be any of those. It doesn't need to be all of them.
Just trying to think what comes to mind most immediately. I know it's from 2020 or 2021, but I watched Landscapers with Olivia Colman recently about a murder that happened. A couple of I don't know what I don't know what I can say that won't give anything away. The performances are amazing, experimental and avant-garde in parts where they break the fourth wall. It's meta. It almost feels like it's being directed on a theatre stage at certain points.
Yes, it really does.
Thrilling and creepy, and it didn't miss a beat the whole way through. And it was a big surprise to me because I kept going, like, I watch a lot of TV, and I was like, how did I miss this? It's almost perfect. And then the other thing that I'm enjoying a lot at the moment is The New Yorker has a new podcast called Critics at Large. Every week they pick a cultural moment and they dissect it. And what I kind of like about it is that it's engaging enough that you have to concentrate, but not so engaging that you couldn't be cooking or doing the dishes.
Love that.
So it strikes that kind of perfect balance.
I'm going to be whacking that on when I'm cooking tonight, so thank you. I absolutely love that, and I didn't think that I'd like. It's called The Landscapers, isn't it? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just Landscapers, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think that I was going to enjoy that for the subject matter, and I won't give any spoilers, but I'm willing to watch anything that Olivia Colman's in because I just absolutely adore her. And it was so good. I was completely hooked from start to finish. So I second that recommendation.
You know how and also Olivia Colman is so much everywhere that you forget how great an actress she is.
Yes.
I think Landscapers is Olivia Colman being the most Olivia Colman. It's like it's the best of everything that she can do.
Yes, I love her so much. We need to protect her at all costs. What is next for you? Because I've finished The Coast Road and now I'm impatient for something else. So what have I got to look forward to?
Well, in terms of start off with events, because this comes out on 9th.
Yes.
I'm doing an event at Waterstones on Tottenham Court Road with two Irish authors called Sarah Crossan and Lucy Caldwell.
Love Sarah Crossan's work.
That is hang on a second, it's on the 14th of May.
Perfect.
So that's something that I'm doing. I am writing a book. I'm writing another novel. I feel like I'm quite deep into it already. However, I'm still not 100% decided or confident that it is working or that I can make it work. It carries on a lot of the same themes as The Coast Road, but the first person narrative written from the perspective of an 82-year-old woman, and she is a monster, and she's trying to correct some perceived wrongs about her past in this particular account. And I think the tone is very different. I'm going for more of a psychological study, and I think that it's a much darker book.
Interesting. I mean, the second that you said she's a monster, I was completely sold on that. So I'm really excited for, yeah, I'm going to be looking out everywhere for your work because I enjoyed this book so much, and I really do mean that. It was such a brilliant book. For our listeners, I'm going to pop a link in the show notes for you to order yourselves a copy because you absolutely must. Can our listeners find you anywhere on social media? Are you on there?
No, I'm not. I would love to say that's because I have some great philosophy and that I'm a crusader against social media, but I literally have no impulse control. So I just I just, I never went on Instagram, so I don't miss it. And I just know that if I did, I would be highly addicted.
Yeah,
So no,
that's smart.
no
That's
one,
very smart.
no one can contact me anywhere.
Bye. You do have a website though,
I
so
do.
maybe they can look there.
It's a last ditch resort you can go to.
They can come and
Like,
see you at the events that I'm linking
like
below.
a
They can
janky website that I never get around to updating. But yeah,
they can find you there. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And yeah, I'm so grateful that I got to read your book and that I've got to chat to you all about it. So thank you.
no problem. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And just for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so we can reach more of you. And if you want to give me a follow, you can do so at Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And that is all we've got time for. So thank you very much. Thank you once again, Alan. And bye.